Can everyone see that? Just a thumbs up. Oh, awesome.
Kia ora whānau, good evening. Thank you for coming this afternoon. Awesome friendly faces I recognise in those screens. Thank you so much for coming along. This is courtesy of Techweek and also Tauranga's Groundswell festival that we're able to bring you all together this evening. Thank you very much for coming. I thought we'd start this evening's hui with a karakia to set the scene, and Kaye-Maree is going to welcome us officially to Tech for Good. Thanks, Kaye-Maree.
Awesome. Kia ora tātou katoa, kia koutou ko tai mai ki tēnei, kaupapa, ngā mihi kautū kia koutou. Anei tētahi karakia, hei whakapai I o tātou nei haerenga I te pōnei. So kia ora everyone, I'm Kaye-Maree. I'm just going to open us up with a bit of a blessing, just to get the energies vibing for tonight for our Tech for Good gig. And again, just a real awesome thank you for being here tonight. Kia taunga manaakitanga a te mea ngaro, ki runga ki tēnā o tātou. Kia mahi a te hua mā kihikihi, kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te reo Māori, kia tūturu, ka whakamaua, kia tīna. Haumi e, hui e, tae ki e.
Taki e. Beautiful. Thank you, Kaye-Maree. Awesome. Kia ora. Ko Joanne Allen, or Joe, toko ingoa. I'm Joe. I'm a co-founder of Venture Centre, and it is really awesome to have you all here for this conversation this evening. I'm not going to do too much of an intro because I'm going to leave that to our awesome host for the evening, Viv Conway. But I just want to thank you, and as Kaye-Maree said, set the tone for the evening for a really generative conversation around these awesome pieces of technology and these awesome wahine. I think we're the only all-female tech lineup in all of Techweek, actually, which is fantastic. Having these wonderful ladies working on some of the serious pieces of tech we need to make sure that Aotearoa, in fact, the world, remains resilient should the next crisis happen, which we know it won't, right? We hope it won't. But these pieces of tech are needed. So I'll leave it to Viv to open us up and introduce Viv Conway, who's also a awesome entrepreneur in our network here at Venture Centre, and has had lots of practice doing exactly this kind of hui. So over to you, Viv.
Kia ora everyone. Thank you, Joe. That's such a flattering intro. I'm so excited to be here, and it feels very apt that we're in a virtual kind of conference. I think Techweek being Techweek, it kind of just makes sense. And it's kind of exciting that I know Pascal, John, myself all discussed, the lead up to this and how this event was planned based on the challenges that we faced before COVID. But as a result of COVID, they've kind of been a little bit, what would be the word, like enhanced, or they've been stressed even more so. And it's meant that, yeah, these were challenges before COVID, but actually now some of them even more so. And what does our new world look like? So we'll discuss a little bit about that tonight. And the 4 kind of topics that we're covering, you'll notice, are ones that I'm sure everyone has had touch points with. So I think there's going to be something that everyone will be able to relate to or find very interesting. And I think be able to kind of push your thinking around it as well. I know that I'm excited about some of the topics tonight. And with that, like the complex world that we have and that we're about to walk into and live, it often takes complex solutions. But I like the way that the ideas are being presented tonight. So looking forward to that. Awesome. So in the chat box, you'll see, I think down the bottom, you can kind of link yourself in. And if you have questions throughout the presentation, we'll have our speakers speak for about 7 or 8 minutes, and then the panelists will have a chance to ask some questions. And then I think Pascal and Emily will be monitoring that chat, so that if you have questions throughout the presentations, pop them in there and we'll get to them after the speakers have spoken. Does that make sense? If you're, oh yeah, cool, awesome. So some people are in the chat. If you like, you can just jump in there and introduce yourself. I think you can even change your name so that Pascal and Emily can refer to you as the right person. Perfect. And there's some reactions down the bottom as well. So I think the other thing to note is that tonight, all of those, or the koha from the tickets, we are off to support Good Neighbour. So if you haven't heard about the work that Good Neighbour does, they're around transforming communities and around limiting food waste and redispersing that food that may otherwise have been thrown out back into the community. And they've also got involvement in things like community gardens. So the impact that they have is massive, and I think it's appropriate for the time that we're in. Oh, I've jumped ahead, haven't I? I've sort of already gone over this. So as I mentioned earlier, a little talk from the presenters. I'll make sure that they're not going over time. And then we'll have some panel questions. And then again, just making sure that you're popping any questions in the chat there. So again, if you don't know where that is, it's down the bottom of your screen, just that little chat bubble there, and you should be able to put something in there. Perfect. So now we can get on to introducing our first speaker, Kaye-Maree Dunn. Now I've got a little intro written up to you. So Kaye-Maree Dunn is from Ahau, a community management and digital identity platform. So it's a data management platform for tribes, communities and individuals. Their kaupapa, or their mission, is to empower communities and people with access, ownership and management of personal data, with the hope that this will lead to building stronger, healthier communities, greater use of community resources and a stronger sense of identity amongst people. So right now you think about how we are identified, and it might just be something like a passport or a driver's license, which we don't necessarily own, I suppose is the word we would say. So Ahau, as far as I can tell so far, is a way that we can then be in control of our data. And I'm sure you've heard the term data is the new oil. So it's quite a powerful thing. We've seen how that can play out in various, like political campaigns and stuff abroad. So Kaye-Maree, it sounds like Ahau is a massive undertaking. How did it come about?
Yeah, kia ora everyone. It's always like, whoa, there's my face there, and it's quite hard out. So so the journey for Ahau has been about 2.5 years, and it actually started out through my involvement with the Edmund Hillary Fellowship. And around 2.5 years ago, I was in a spa pool and with a bunch of people, in particular Mark Pascal, who's the head of, was the chairman and founder of a group called Blockchain New Zealand, was talking about blockchain. So they're having this kind of conversation about blockchain and currency, cryptocurrency, and I was like, what's that? They were like, oh, it's this new technology that's sweeping the planet. And I'm like, okay, tell me more. And then I didn't quite understand what it was that they were talking about, but I did get a sense that it was something that was important. And like any new emergent technologies, there were two things that popped up for me. The first one was, how can we ensure that these kinds of technologies are available and accessible and usable for Māori communities? So that's always the very first thought that came into my mind. And then the second one was, how can we be sure that we're not left behind in whatever developments take place? And so when you don't quite know, I don't have a technology background. Primarily my work has been in community development, strategy development, and facilitation and all sorts of other enterprise. And so I was definitely very green around the edges, around technology generally, and then also this tech. So the very first step that I took was to kind of try and figure it out as blindly as I did. I ended up having a conversation with a gentleman called Aaron McDonald, and that was, and this is kind of this famous conversation that I talk about often, where we left Waiuku. I jumped in with him because I needed a ride into Auckland City, and during that ride, Aaron and I were talking about how do we start to reframe the economy and our challenges around banking and our challenges around transparency around data. And we basically made an agreement in a 40 to 45 minute journey between Waiuku and Auckland City that we were going to revolutionise, indigenous involvement in the economy. We were looking at how we might create a new bank. And the very first area that I landed on was the design of an indigenous cryptocurrency. So that took a wee while, and Centrality, who had at that time must have raised around $100 million plus, so they were still emerging in the technology as well. They kind of gave me space to go and hang out with them and learn as best as I could. And so myself and a group of rangatahi, young people, we kind of went and moved ourselves into a very swanky office in the middle of Auckland. to try and figure this technology out. We didn't quite get very far because we're going around in circles a lot, and that was probably due to me and my own leadership. But then about a year in, I kind of had to give myself a bit of a break. And then I came back and I'd been invited to enter into a hackathon by Centrality. And they said, look, come in. So basically I had made an intention that morning that I was going to win that hackathon. And I had an idea about Indigicoin, which is my cryptocurrency. But during that hackathon and through the team, we ended up landing on a kaupapa called Ahau, which was actually the missing piece of the cryptocurrency, which was that the fabric of humanity centers every single human being is connected by whakapapa, connected by genealogy. And that was the part. It was so simple and so powerful, and I just felt like, oh, it was staring me right in the face, but I needed to go through that journey and experience. Anyway, we won. We won $100,000 worth of investment from Centrality, and then we went straight into a 3-month intensive incubation program. And the premise was simple: was how can we try and ensure that we protect individuals' connection to their identity using, at that time, blockchain technology? And then also, how can we ensure that this technology is available freely to our people so that there is no reason why we ever lose touch with who we are or our whānau or our connections? So it's been a long journey. It's been 2.5 years, and we've worked really, really hard in understanding the tech and forging some really powerful relationships with our tribal partners, Ngā Manawa and Tauranga Moana being one of those. And I've had to learn really, really quickly. It's now moved into this next space of, we've now built our beta version of Ahau, so whānau can now upload their genealogy. We have a back-end system based on a service called Scuttlebutt, which is basically decentralized servers. So it means that Ahau does not own or see any of the data that individuals put into the system. It's all belonging to the individual. And now we're building an archive system so that individuals can create their own repository for their memories, photos, and videos. And then as a result of this, we'll also be building a layer around digital identity. And my broader vision, of course, is to enter into digital banking. So a few areas that we've covered off over the last couple of years.
Can I go first with the question, Jo? Yeah, sure. Okay, awesome. So I think, like, if we just take a one step back, like, I personally know what blockchain is and I have like a little bit of an understanding. But for those who don't know, can you I suppose a brief overview of what blockchain is and what makes it so secure?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I try to explain this as best as I can, or have a go at it anyway. But basically, blockchain emerged out of a new cryptocurrency at the time, and I call it like the rails, basically, of which this kind of digital form of exchange sat on. And brilliance around blockchain is basically that it's like what would I call it? It's like a timestamp. And so any information that is loaded onto this timestamp, it literally is stamped into a chain, or stamped itself into a long line of code. And it means that that piece of information has its own unique identifier. It's very difficult for anybody to replicate. It's date stamped and time stamped. And so in order for it to be released on this particular railroad, it means that it gives me assurance that, one, no one else can input exactly the same information because mine is unique. And the second one is, you talk about it being decentralized in that there is a copy. Once that copy has been made, all of the different elements, or all the different connector points, which are called nodes, they all are uploaded with exactly the same information. So you kind of look at it like a whole stack of Google documents that get uploaded at the same time. And again, I love that we have the ability to be able to know what is going on in regards to our information being stamped in. It is complex in that you have to be very, very mindful that the transactions or the information share can be slow. We're hoping that it's going to be quick, but actually it can be quite slow. And also you do need to have special understanding or knowledge of how the systems work. So it's not really like an easy plug and play like you would with the systems that we have today. But it will be and lead us to the internet of tomorrow. So I don't know if I'm explaining myself very well because I'm not very good at symbolic metaphors, but it's a connection. It's a way of connecting, and that's why I look at it. It's like the genealogy of the internet, really, the way that I try and make sense of it.
That's a great description, Kaye-Maree. That was awesome, actually. Thank you. And it's, as you said, the internet of tomorrow, right? Like it's here right now. It's such an exciting project because it's got ramifications across a whole load of different areas, but particularly for Māori in the collecting together of data that's been all over the place, right? So I know we've had a few discussions around Ngā Manawa. It's not just about the whakapapa, although that's the anchor that holds everything together. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other things that we can bring together in this project and how they might be useful?
Well, if I think about how do we utilize technology for good, and if at the very first premise, and this is kind of where the conversation with Aaron from Centrality actually started, was that, and even the whole, the godfather, I suppose, of Bitcoin was this person called Satoshi Nakamoto, right? And so his vision was to take power away from the elites, take power away from those that have had domination and control over our information and centralized it. So we've become passive users of it, and actually take that power away and actually bring it back into the hands of the common folk. And that in itself, just that simple premise was powerful. And when we take that down a few notches in regards to individual control of information, what we are trying to prove is that state control, domination of information, especially personal information, again, it's been taken for granted. Banks, governments, and agencies have held our data for a long time, and they control the flow of that data. And so they want our information, but they're not necessarily giving us the pathway to give us transparent access to our data, and for me to be able to pull it back at any time. So for us, yes, we want to be able to create a decentralized, in that the power of that data goes back into the hands of the individuals around their most sacred information. That's your genealogy. That's your personal information that belongs to you. No one should charge you a subscription fee for having access to the data that belongs to you personally. The second part around it is we can create the most fandangled platform, but the most important element, and this is around access, is that we also need to work with our community so that they understand the technology as well. So no matter how awesome your end product may be, if we're not actually designing at the level and at the stage of our very young and our very old, and actually making that system accessible to them, then we're not doing our duty as, in my view anyway, as interpreters and translators of technology. So a real, and again, this kind of brings my community development hat to the fold here, which is how do we explain blockchain effectively? Probably somebody will do it a lot better than I did before, but also how do you explain decentralized technology to our oldest members of our community? How do we normalize archiving? Because again, at the moment, either our information is stored on Google, on Facebook, or for ancestry.com, and again, we don't have full ownership or control over that information. And if those systems go down, so does my information, unless I've made a copy of it somewhere. So we're trying to flip the script again and saying we need the information We want to be able to control the flow of information. We want to be able to say who we give that information to and why, so that's around access. And we also must make it integral to our design to make our platform and our approach so easy, so super easy that it doesn't alienate anybody in the process. And so when we are looking at, well, what does that mean for organizations that we're working with? You know, the groups that we have are very broad. We have individuals that are disconnected from their identity and just want to use a system to be able to help them gather the information together. We've got marae, who also have very diverse requirements and have a whole lot of information that's been stored in shoeboxes and boxes and suitcases in different ways and formats. And we also have tribal organisations who have mass responsibility, huge screeds of documents, and going and dating back to, you know, the early 1900s. So when you've got documents and videos and so where does all that information go? And who is controlling that information in regards to, if I do digitize it, how are we actually creating a process that puts the individual and the ownership rights at the fore? So that's part and parcel of what we've designed for our broad use case. And we've gone broad because, again, we feel that if our solution can help support a wide range of different use cases for the way that they need to manage, control, and determine how they're going to manage their information for the legacy that's yet to come, and they're leaving a legacy, sorry, and they're also, you know, setting a trail for the generations to come. Then how do we design that? So we've got to have like 100 to, you know, 1,000-year vision for the system that we're creating today.
Fantastic. That's awesome. I've got a couple of questions because I'm close to you in the project. I've got a couple of questions. I've been thinking about the work that we've been doing together and thinking that this is Lean Startup 2.0, the way that you and your team are handling this project, because it is so broad. So maybe we need a New Zealand name for it. It's whānau startup process or something, because you've invited everybody into the process to actually build it along with you and your team. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how that's working, Kaye-Maree, because I think it's awesome and probably a practice that should be more widespread.
Yeah, I think co-creation has been really important to us. I mean, again, because we're dealing with a multiplicity of challenges. If we think about how Māori, minority and Pacifica communities accessing technology, you know, again, we're trying to make technology less scary. And if you can imagine, again, a whole crew of Māori rocking into a central city, Auckland base, just owning it, you know, pretending that we didn't know anything about anything, but we did anyway because we were secure in who we were, right? So it's all good that we could kind of rock into a space and own it, but that will only take you so far. You still also need to get some base understanding around the technology that you're working with. So co-creating and making sure that the journey was accessible. So it's been really important to us to document everything that we've been doing. The second part has been around the storytelling. So every single step that we've taken has been a milestone in itself. And one of those has been the way that we incorporate tikanga Māori and a kaua or a practice into our company constitution. That in itself was a milestone for us because we wanted to bring not just the concept to Te Ao Māori and say, oh, that's really lovely, but actually integrate it not only into our company constitution, the way that we run our business, right down to the way that we influence the practices of our developers, because we've got global developers working in this program, in this project with us. And so things like when you're dealing with sacred information like genealogy, as you would when you're dealing with it in real life, there are considerations like food. You know, again, food and whakapapa are not two things that we bring together because one will cancel out the other. and therefore what does it look like in a tech space? And so the developers were exploring things like, well, do we fast when we're developing, when we're coding, because it's such a sacred, this is a sacred repository, and therefore we need to be as sacred as possible when we're actually engaging in the tech. Through to the use of karakia as well. So, these are non-Māori developers who are really taking on board an indigenous perspective of designing this technology to be of service. Right through to the way that we've engaged. So again, when it comes to genealogy, there are many intricacies of genealogy to be cognizant of. And those are whose version of truth? Whose truth are we actually going to believe? Now, we're not going to tell families what their truth is, but when it comes to creating a way that information can be formatted, again, I know that these are my parents, right? Because I've been told that these are my parents, but what if actually that's not really my birth father? And so when you're creating a shared record for not only your own family, but others, then you've got to have some considerations around that. We also had to think about the design of our genealogy system to reflect whāngai. So those who have been Māori adopted, or I guess a gift to another family. So I'm a whāngai. My mother passed away and I was whāngai adopted by her sister. And so how do you reflect that in a genealogy format so that it acknowledges both my blood tie to my mother, my birth mother, but it also acknowledges that I'm a whāngai child to my auntie. And so these are some complexities around relationships. And so we had to get that feedback from our tribal partners that we work with. And I think the other part that's been co-creational for us was the broad use cases. We did that on purpose so that we could come up with a solution that could fit nicely in between, so that we had a solution that would be comfortable for an individual to be able to use with confidence, for a marae community to be able to engage with, who have all their own challenges and aspirations, along with a commercial entity, as well as an iwi. They all have different requirements, and so we have to build a really robust process so that we can hear and take people's feedback, but we also have to come up with not a version of truth, but a broad enough system that can help people reflect their own truth. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
That's epic. I've just got a couple of questions from the chat for you. So the first one is from Deborah, and she says, question for you, what is next, and is there anything you need that we can help with?
Yes, I'd love you to link up to our Ahau Facebook page, because we are proactively looking for beta testers. So if you want to test the system, and it's not just for Māori, just also being really clear here, it has been built with kaupapa Māori principles, but it's actually a universal tool. So you all have parents, you all have grandparents, you all have stories that you want to capture. I don't know if you are holding all of those stories in one place or have a process around that. So we want to make that available to everyone. So your feedback will be really valuable. That's one way that I'd love you to help. And then secondly, keep your eye on that page, because we're doing a refresher of the website, but we're also designing an online archiving system as well, so that we can help share the methodology for getting communities ready for Ahau. And so it will be great, again, for you to test that system out. So it will be helpful.
Awesome. And then the last question for you from Naomi says, she's got a bit of a geeky question. Do you have a way to measure how much electricity the particular blockchain setup uses in Ahau's system? So for context, some blockchains use ridiculous amounts and the info isn't always easy to find. ETH and BC are much more intensive than Telos, for instance. I assume you know what those acronyms mean.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, we're utilising, so we're not necessarily utilising a blockchain as such. I think at the time when we started, Centrality was still emerging with their blockchain system. And so at this present moment, we're utilising a system called Scuttlebutt. So it's low energy intensive, and it's been purposefully designed that way, because one of our primary values is kaitiakitanga and tiaki papa tuanuku. So we wanted to make sure that if we're engaging in this technology, that it does as little damage to the planet as possible. So, you know, we've created these like massive moonshot aspirations and hoping that we can test it bit by bit. The other part is that this is not a railroad for currency. And so this is a railroad system and a decentralized yet connected system, which is using information. So information exchange between nodes or between what we call two different pātaka or information sources. So thankfully it's not energy intensive, and also not necessarily the rails for currency yet.
Awesome. Thanks, Kaye-Maree. And before I let you go, just in case anyone wants to ask you further questions, where can people find you?
Oh, kia ora, Viv. Kia ora, Viv. So if you want to get in contact with me, you've got 3 ways. Our website is www.ahau.io. So that's our website, so you can get in contact with me that way. I'm always happy to get new friends on LinkedIn. So if you've got a real interest in this area, we're really interested in helping to build the future developers and really building the pipeline of whānau that want to be involved in learning this technology. So if you're interested in that, or have anybody that you know who'd really like to learn about this, get in contact with me via LinkedIn or our website. And thirdly, if you're interested in taking this technology on and learning about it, also get in touch. We'd love to work with you. We might not be able to, we've got, you know, quite a few partners at the moment. However, once we create our online platform, you should be able to be onboarded relatively easy. So if you're interested in the program and project for your community, also get in touch.
Epic, thank you so much. And now I'm going to introduce the next speaker, Greer. And so I'm sure we're well aware of the housing issues that New Zealand's facing with at the moment. And I mean, it's not uncommon for New Zealanders to be contributing up to 75% of their wages towards a mortgage. So it makes sense that we've got people like Greer looking at alternative solutions. So Greer is from Urban Advisory, an urban strategy consultancy based in New Zealand. They specialise in regeneration and housing strategy and work alongside clients to deliver neighbourhoods and build environment projects. The Urban Advisory are rethinking the way that we create our cities so that all cities are good for all people. They believe that by thinking about our built environments in a different way, like prioritising people's well-being and sense of place, they can create a more inclusive, connected and equitable communities. The core principles of the Urban Advisory are being inclusive, embracing complexity and enabling action. So their unique and transformational approach to city making is grounded in the urban strategy profession and defined by determination, fresh thinking, authenticity and respect for people and place. So that sounds quite complex to me, Greer, but I'm hoping that, you know, with these changes and with COVID and differences that you guys have had to overcome, I'm really interested to hear more about the Urban Advisory.
Kia ora everybody, and thanks for having me. And I don't generally consider myself a technology entrepreneur, although there's a lot of common themes that I've already picked up around the use of data and the preservation of planet and people's well-being. And so I guess if you think about it like that, then I guess technology in a way is our business. But a little bit about the Urban Advisory. So we are consultants, but we also work on a number of projects which are actually very physical, manifest themselves in actual physical buildings. And so we're consultants with a twist. A lot of the work that we do with government and councils is broader strategy work. It's around things like with the regeneration of Eastern Porirua, how we can embed a community-led and co-design process for that 25-year long housing and urban development program for the community. But the specific focus of today and the area of the work that I will talk about is what we have been calling alternative housing, but we're going to drop the alternative because we're trying to mainstream it. So it's just different ways to not only develop housing, but live in and participate in housing, and also different ways to own property. So much like the data, we've commodified property all around the world, and we trade it and we use it to build wealth. And a lot of the principles behind the different models that we have been exploring are very similar to the principles of decentralization that we've just been talking about. So alternative models include, and some of the most sort of common, I guess, terminology that you probably hear is co-housing, but it's so much more than that. In New Zealand, we obviously have a Te Ao Māori version of alternative housing models, in that papakainga is a way for Māori to live on Māori land in a more Māori way. And so when I talk about alternative models and what we've learned from overseas, I am very conscious that we also need to look in our own backyards around different ways that people have come together to live in a more sustainable way. So the principles around sustainability, connected communities, and decommodification of housing are sort of applied to all these alternative models that we talk about. We work with groups all around New Zealand, and we in different capacities, and there's about probably a handful of projects that are coming online around the country, and then we also work with government and councils around what they can do to grow this sector through their housing strategies and regeneration strategies, and through, I guess, the way that they support groups who have started these projects but facing a number of barriers. So we sort of work to remove the very large number of barriers that there are for these projects.
Thanks, Claire. That's an awesome introduction to what you do.
She's got some slides if she wants.
Would you like to present your slides, or are you?
Yeah, I mean, I can whip through these really quickly. I mean, we probably don't really need the slides, but just in terms of, I guess, why these housing models are really, really needed, and we touched briefly on the different the cost of housing for people and how much people actually spend on housing. So in New Zealand, obviously, we've got some of the most expensive housing in the world. And we've also got housing that's not really fit for purpose in terms of it doesn't fit our cultural requirements, it doesn't actually serve people in terms of what their housing preferences are. And a lot of the work we do is around research. And so we undertake research to actually understand housing demand and future housing preferences. So that informs the advice and the strategies that we develop around what type of housing we should actually be delivering in our communities. So the alternative models that we talk about, we spend a lot of time overseas working with people who were living in housing cooperatives and housing community land trusts and co-housing. And what we found was that built into the model was a process where the community came together, was generally driven by residents, and they co-designed and often co-owned the properties themselves, and they built into the model a mechanism whereby instead of those properties being able to be sold on to the market with capital gain for the individual, there was resale formulas that restricted the ability of capital gain that individuals could make. It's quite a sort of like contentious point because in New Zealand we are very attached to our homes and owning our homes and the ability to build wealth from our homes. And so what we're trying to, I guess, we're trying to grow the sector where actually there's a housing option that isn't about wealth building, and it's not about a commodity, but actually it's about where can we build homes that are more affordable in places that people can have security of tenure and they can access it at price points that are significantly lower than what you would get if you were trying to buy a house at market. And how can we get people's mindsets to shift away from focusing on ownership in the traditional sense in terms of myself individually owning land, but actually about the collective ownership of land that is protected for the future generations and that is actually stewarded instead of it being bought and sold. And it's there preserved for the benefit of affordable housing and for greater community stability. So a lot of the models are all sort of have democratic kind of governance arrangements around them, like community land trust or a cooperative, for example. Requires people to come together in a different way to manage the collective ownership of that property, instead of it being something that I individually can make choices about. And saying that they do, all these models do still enable people to live individually, and you can have your own home and you can have your own space, and you don't have to sign up to like communal dinners every week or anything like that. But you share the ownership of the land with through its protection in, say, like a land trust with the greater community. And so you're not paying for all of that land, you're only paying for sort of your right to have your dwelling, and you do own the dwelling, and to stay there for as long as you want to, which again is similar to a sort of a papakāinga style development, whereby the housing and the improvements are owned by the individual, but the land is in collective ownership. The design of these houses they're generally more sustainable in that they prioritise such things as, like solar panels and better waste management, car sharing, electric cars instead of individual mechanical cars. There's much more shared amenity. There is a greater degree of community building within the community. So you've intentionally decided to participate in a project of this nature because of the fact that you want that social connection and the additional layer of security, I guess, that some of these models provide, rather than private renting or even individual ownership. I guess one of the things that's really interesting around the housing affordability piece is that there is actually some real significant barriers, and a lot of those are starting to be overcome by new technologies that we're seeing around how people can actually access different types of finance to buy property, or at least part of property. So there's a platform called BrickX, and instead of myself being able to go and buy a home, I can buy bricks. So I can access property and still invest in property, but in a different way. And so then the opportunity for people to access housing is still like really limited if you can't afford to buy, and have the security of ownership, but you can access housing in a different way. And so what all these different sort of like housing innovations are doing is making it more accessible, making housing more accessible in a broader variety of ways than we currently have at the moment.
That sounds epic, and it's sounding a little bit like above my skill level. But for someone, for example, say I'm the millennial that spends too much on avocado and toast, like we all know, what are some examples of how, say, okay, I want to go and build, buy my first home, but I've spent too much money, I haven't saved enough. What are some of the alternative solutions that you've seen work really well, both here or overseas, that you can see happening in New Zealand soon?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different, like, starting locally, like really great innovations that have started up around the ability to co-own. So organisation by the name of Miuwi, which is actually going through a bit of a revamp at the moment, so you won't find it as called Miuwi. They need to relaunch, but basically what they did is they set up the ability for people to come together with small amounts of deposits and co-buy property. So that was quite successful. And then there's other things that are sort of like require a lot more energy and require a lot more dedication and actually funding. And the ability for you to be able to do this is to enter into a co-housing project. You can come together with a group of people to co-design and develop and then own a property that's at below market rates. but that's still not really affordable for a lot of people. So that's where the cooperative structure and the community land trust structure comes in. Now they significantly increase affordability because with the cooperative structure, you buy into essentially a corporation. So you buy shares in a company that give you exclusive rights to your unit, your apartment, your townhouse. And the threshold of entry is so much lower because of the way that that structure is created, and that the development entity, which might be facilitated by a company like my own, has attracted a range of different capitals, whether it's from the bank or from social impact investors or from residents. And you create like a capital stack. That means that collectively your whole mortgage might be $100, but you as an individual only need to come up with your percentage that's equivalent to what your shareholding is. And so across the whole company, and it always involves third parties that are investing, and they get a small return, but a very small return. And as a resident, if you're buying shareholders, you also are investing, and so you also get a small return. And there's some really great technologies that have come out of the UK that, after a project called the LILAC, so it stands for low income something communities, it escapes me, but that tracks all of the inputs in terms of whose contributions, how much people have put in, how much return they get, how much they need to pay for their mortgage, how many shareholdings they have, how much that increases over time. If they want to leave, how much do they get out? And so they've built this really cool technology to track all of that, so that they used to do it manually. And then, so that's the cooperative structure. And then the community land trust is probably less sort of like technologically savvy, but it's more simple in that you're essentially buying the house on top of the land and not the land. And the land is protected forever. It is secure for affordable housing. And often land is put into a community land trust, initially by government or council or people who recognise the value of affordable housing in our communities, because it obviously produces great amounts of economic and social stability when people have housing stability. And so it's a different way for governments and councils to invest in an affordable housing product. Instead of supporting just state housing builds all around the world, we're seeing councils and governments putting in land into community land trust and setting up the democratic process around that management of that land to deliver affordable housing. Because as you can imagine, if you can take out the land component, especially in our major cities where land prices are driving the cost of housing up, you significantly reduce the cost of housing. And so, like anyone else, you could roll into your friendly community land trust and buy a house or rent a house from them, sometimes up to 70% below market. That's the rate of the latest London CLT called St Clements, right in the middle of London, and they're providing brand new housing for 70% below their market equivalent through this structure.
Wow. Wow. Okay. And just a few comments and questions from that before we move on. So Naomi said she loves the quote you mentioned about skills acquisition through participation. Sounds to me like building intergenerational wellbeing, which is awesome. Edmund says, Greer, amazing kaupapa. I would love to hear your take on organisations that work with landlords to link people to affordable rental properties. What part does this have to play in the mix of housing options?
Yeah, so can you just repeat that? So that's the community organisations working with...
Yeah, so it's just in the little chat box and it says, I would love to hear your take on organisations that work with landlords to link people to affordable rental properties. So what part does this have to play in the mix of housing options?
Yeah, cool. So basically all of these structures and models add another option for people. So instead of having to go through a facility, a provider that helps you to access income rent related subsidies or some of the social services or affordable rental products that some of the community housing providers offer, you could then use, you could go to those people and they could link you to one of these products. I have to sort of like caveat it that Hamilton City Councils has set up a community land trust, and there are a number of small community housing trusts that operate. It's one in Queenstown that operate in a similar way, but there's not large scale numbers of these sorts of houses available in New Zealand at the moment, and that's a symptom of the fact that I guess the global movement has just not yet got to us, but we are coming up with our own local responses, especially for around Māori housing on Māori land, which are very similar. But I think there's a huge role for those organisations to play because of the degree of, I guess, pastoral care or wraparound services that these models require for people to actually be able to participate in them, because it's not as necessarily as straightforward as just renting off a private like a private landlord. There is another layer of participation which we think is really valuable, and actually some recent economic cost benefit analysis on a project in Eastern Porirua has demonstrated that it actually delivers these models and that role that people have in actually participating in their housing futures and making choices and voting on issues that impact them, or having a say in what the design looks like, or how the rubbish is managed, or what we do with the maintenance plan. All of these things actually, which builds on the skills, it actually contributes additional value that becomes broader value in the economy. So there's a whole lot of other benefits from those community development agencies or whatever organisations are involved in linking in people into housing. There's a huge role for them in all of these models, because it's not just about you buy a house and then you leave them to it. We talk about a housing continuum and a housing ecosystem, which is actually about getting people to move around the housing ecosystem or up and down the continuum as is appropriate for their phase in life. So often when you hear housing people talk, they talk about trying to move people along the continuum, whereas we're trying to get people to understand that, well, actually sometimes renting might be okay in life, and that if you had secure, long-term, stable rental, then why should rental be considered a secondary option? Why do we push people into home ownership who often can't afford home ownership, and that actually puts a greater stress on those whānau, and it doesn't actually serve their needs? So if we had a broader range of options, then those community development organisations would actually be able to match people with those options so that they actually suited the time and life phases and the needs of those whānau, instead of currently we've got very limited options, so we have to sort of push people into what's available instead of what people actually want.
Awesome. I'm gonna there's a couple more questions in the chat, but we'll come back to them at the very end if we have enough time. But thank you so much, Greta. It's just fascinating, and it's exciting to see that for such a massive issue, there's some epic solutions being developed. Now, the next person I wanted to introduce, I'm just flicking between my things. I wanted to introduce and take the stage Suzanne Wilkinson from Build Back Better. So I think it's again very apt that we've got you here today, Suzanne, because, and Professor Suzanne as well, because of what we've seen happen recently with COVID. We've literally watched in front of us how governments both here in New Zealand and around the world have dealt with this adversity and this uncertainty, and we've been able to, like watch and be bystanders and be involved in the process. So I suppose the Building Back Better, or BBB, as mentioned on your website, became popular as a catchphrase, particularly following the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, where it was recognised that the time period following a disaster is an optimal time to make changes in a community. The post-disaster reconstruction and recovery phase presents a unique opportunity to introduce new ideas, technologies, and methods to improve on pre-disaster conditions. So I suppose the first question that I have for you is, and I suppose there are many, but what have been some of the massive opportunities that you've seen arise as a result of COVID in New Zealand? Are you on mute, Suzanne?
Sorry, yeah, you're able to hear me now? Sorry, I've had a bit of technical problems. I've now come onto an iPad. Well, I mean, COVID has just demonstrated what we pretty much already knew, So we've been working in the disaster recovery space for about 20 years as various teams, so various university teams. So I think what COVID has really done is demonstrated to us that, you know, we're not as prepared as we think we are, that we can do better, that we can build resilience into our communities in particular ways, but that when we respond, it brings out the really good things about our communities and our societies in terms of responsiveness. Certainly in New Zealand, that's the case. So I think looking at the good things that have happened around COVID, it's certainly been the New Zealand response to that, and how it's had kind of open communication, transparent information, evidence-based and evidence-led recovery processes. You know, I think some of the things we already knew were that the vulnerable and always fare worse in disasters. We already knew that. That's where we need to spend our time building resilience. Are our structures ready and prepared for disasters, not just like pandemics, but other disasters like earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, all those sorts of disasters that we spent a lot of time looking at. And what we're trying to do is use our research to build resilience. And so Build Back Better is the terminology we use to try and embed resilient recovery into our societies.
Epic. And what led you to start this venture? You said you've been in the space for 20 years. How did that come to be?
So I don't know if you know about how research and academics tend to work. So what we tend to do is we put together our bids for big research funding, and we collaborate across the country and across the world, and we put a big bid into government, and they go, yep, we like that, or no, we don't like that. Usually they say, no, we don't like that, or we're not going to fund that, because obviously there's many university academics going for these bids. And we put in a really big bid around resilience around the early 2000s, and the work has just really developed from there. We started looking initially at resilient organisations, and we started looking at how to recover from disasters. And the team has kind of grown and morphed into lots of different universities now have resilience teams. Some of them are looking at resilience of infrastructure, and some of them are looking at resilience of communities, some are looking at resilience of businesses, and collectively we've kind of done lots of different pieces of work. So the Build Back Better work really sprung out of the recovery from the Victoria bushfires in 2009. We started to realise that we really needed to develop a good recovery structure and a good recovery process. And it started from some work by one of the PhD students, Sandika, who is now a lecturer at the University of Auckland, myself and a professor at Victoria University, Regan. Basically from the work that we started doing, we started to realise that we could develop a framework and test that framework. And well, once we tested that framework, we started getting a lot of traction from NGOs and other interested parties about using our framework. So from the framework, we've developed an easy to use tool that NGOs and government organisations can use to track their recovery and to develop resilience using the recovery tool. So do you want me to carry on a bit more about the recovery tool, because I'm quite happy to do that. So basically, this is part of our tool. What it's trying to do is to allow governments or NGOs or agencies to kind of think about how to recover from disasters. And essentially, we've got three pillars. We've got one of the pillars is to reduce risk. And under those pillars, we've got kind of three different elements, 3 or 4, depending on how you look at it. What it's trying to do is say, if you had a major disaster, and this particular tool deals specifically with natural disasters that affect communities, infrastructure, cities. What we've tried to do is develop this tool, and it's got these three main pillars. One is reducing risk, another one is community, and the third one is effective implementation. So the piece you're looking at the moment is just how the tool works. It's a very easy to use measurement tool with lots of indicators. And so under reducing risk, we've got some indicators for structural resilience, for instance, indicators for land use planning, indicators for education, and indicators for warning systems. And those four kind of areas are the four areas that evidence has said, if you get those kind of areas right under risk reduction, you're actually going to do quite well in terms of the recovery. So what we've then done is develop all these indicators under, say, for instance, structural resilience here. I think there's maybe 10 or 11 indicators. When you take those indicators, a government agency can just track their recovery. So it's an easy to use tool, lots of different indicators, but also they can switch in and out indicators that actually suit their country or suit their location or suit their region. So it allows people to kind of tailor make a Build Back Better tool using all these indicators that we've already kind of selected for them, in a sense of saying that these are what evidence tells us are the indicators you should use. So the tool is now being used in lots of different countries. It's actually recently been picked up by World Vision in Nepal. We've been using it in Vanuatu, Rarotonga, Sri Lanka, Kaikoura, Christchurch, Fiji. It's recently been used in India, and as I say, it's just been picked up in Nepal. It's free to use, so basically this is a free to use tool. Now, with the COVID recovery, we've actually developed a tool which we haven't tested in any particular way, because it's come on the back of the Build Back Better tool, which took kind of a long time to develop and stress test and change the stuff. The COVID one is really on the back of the Build Back Better tool. So it's again, it's an indicator-based tool for governments to track how well they're doing under the COVID recovery. And so you'll see on this where the Build Back Better .co.nz, that's where all our research and information lies. So if you look at the next slide, I'm not sure who's got the controls. Is it Ryan? Okay, so this piece of work, the Build Back Better piece of work, really fits into this really big national piece of work, which is still ongoing. It's got another 5 years of funding, and it's the National Science Challenge called Resilience to Nature's Challenges. So what we've been trying to do is work with lots of organisations and councils to understand how to build urban resilience for our cities. So in 2017, you'll see on the side that 2017, there's a report that we put out. And essentially, we'd been working on resilience generally for now 20 years. But we were working with several major cities across New Zealand to try and find out what was the problem that they were having in embedding resilience. Because if we don't build resilience, it means that every time we have a major disaster or any kind of disaster, we just go back to the start. We go, oh, this is so terrible. Oh, we got to do something about this. We're very, very good at response, but it's a long-term recovery and using recovery to build resilience that we're not very good at. So we tried to talk to all the different cities to find out, what is it that's stopping them developing resilience? And these are the kind of key features. And so now what we can do as researchers and academics is really work on some of these areas. In particular, we've got definitions of resilience. We're now developing a whole suite of resilience tools. We've got a tool for testing resilience of the transport system, which has been trialled in Far North. We've got tools for testing resilience of our water systems to understand where we need to invest in parts of those systems in order to build up resilience. We've got tools now for businesses, both large and small businesses. trying to build up those businesses in terms of what do they need to do in order to improve their resilience, so that when they get a shock or a stress, what is it that they need to have in place so that they can weather those storms. So what we as researchers are doing is really developing those tools and just making them freely available based on the most the best national and international research that we can find. Okay, do you want me to talk a bit more about?
No, that's
you got a question for me?
Thank you,
Sorry?
Suzanne. That was awesome overview of all of your work. It's when I met some of your team members, it was fantastic to find somebody that had 20 years experience in disaster recovery. We're very lucky to have you here in New Zealand. So your team now are working with councils around the country. How much traction are you getting from councils to actually take that long-term view and build resilience into their planning processes, into economic development, into housing, amongst other things? What's the traction like?
So mixed. So I have to be honest, mixed. So it's never seen particularly as a priority until we have an event, and then it's seen as a major priority. So it's kind of mixed. I think that the tools that we're using now are revealing where the weaknesses are, and so if they can combine resilience building with business as usual, that's where they're going to improve. So for instance, floods in Northland, you might say, well, we already know that there's these pinch points, these hotspots. We've already been able to reveal those through using the resilience tools. And now if you're going to start investing in building up those roads or putting moving those bridges so that they're slightly higher, or building banks, for instance, our tools are giving you the evidence that that's a good thing to do, and that's a priority thing that we think. So it kind of, yes, you're probably going to do it, but it's going to give you an extra evidence-based resource to say you really need to do that. Mostly these things come down to funding. So we have to find smart ways of introducing the resilience building at the same time that we're building our, building our infrastructure. I think the other thing that I would say is we quite often miss opportunities. So for instance, our big build programs that are coming on board and our shovel-ready projects, there's great opportunities there to build resilience into those pieces, those new pieces of infrastructure. Plus there's an opportunity to do kind of climate mitigation work as well. But what everybody kind of says is, it's too hard, or we're not quite sure what that means. Well, we're here to say, we know what that means. We know how to help you. We've got the tools ready to go. If we haven't got the tools ready to go, we can find them for you or develop them for you. So, come and talk to us about this. And so, and we're paid as universities to do that, to have impact. We want to see impact from our research. So we want people to use these. We're not working in isolation. We're quite often working with businesses to co-design lots of these. So an example of the water one was a 3-year project with Hunter Water in New South Wales, who gave us complete and utter, complete access to all their engineers, all their systems information, and we spent 3 years developing a water resilience tool that went right across Hunter Water. We stress tested it. We used scenario testing to produce a tool that they could use, handed it all over, but the proviso was that we could then sell, not sell that tool, but give that tool to other people to use. And so we've got this kind of thing, and we've got those in lots of different areas.
Awesome. And hey, Suzanne, just one last question for you from Greer. Can it be applied to regeneration projects that are not the result of a disaster, but instead years of underinvestment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, all the tools, they're just highlighting what the problems are, the underinvestment problems that have gone on for many, many years. And so, for instance, you know, the water one, we know that, you know, fix the leaks is gonna create, it's better for our water system. But also we know that if you introduce things like water reticulation systems, if you stop using fresh water to, you know, what essentially is cleaning your car and flushing your toilet, why would you use drinking water to do those kinds of things? So if we're looking at resilience building, we want to look at smart ways of using our resources, and so our resilience tools can help with that, can say, look at alternative options for building resilience, or for reducing costs, or for doing something in a different way. And I think some of these things all link together. So what our current work is doing is taking some of the tools and looking more in terms of the climate mitigation. How useful are they for helping us to make climate mitigation decisions? So yeah, certainly that's the case.
Wow, that's epic. And it sounds like the result of all your work is something that's going to become even more so important in the years to come, and, you know, post-COVID, and like you say, things relating to climate change and so on. But now it's time.
Thank you.
And our final speaker, thank you, Suzanne. Our next speaker is Debs Hancock, and if Ryan just flicks through the slide, perfect. We're founder of Riposta app, and we're excited to have Debs here because I'm sure most of you will be aware of our shocking suicide rates in New Zealand, some of the highest in the developed world. So this app is where you share your daily highs and lows so that the data can be combined with others and used to help organisations better understand the collective well-being of their communities. So the goal of the Riposta app is to use our collective voice through data to influence decision makers to help improve not only our own lives, but the lives of those around us and those to come. And the analytics that the app provides organisations with interactive dashboards from which they can measure and respond to the well-being of the communities they care about, whether it be a workplace, school, or community organisation. So Debs, tell us more about the app, and are you the sole founder? Are there other people? What's your background? What led you to this venture?
Kia ora everyone. Ko Debs Hancock tōku ingoa no Wairoa Ahau. I currently live in Tauranga Nui Kiwa, Gisborne. Yeah, so many questions. Where to start? So currently working a team of 5. I guess the initial founder of this project. It's something that's been building, we've been building for a few years now in the Tairāwhiti region. Yeah, and our goal is to really, we're careful to say that it's not a mental health or a mental health management app, but it's something to help just normalize expressing these emotions that we all sort of feel all the time, and making that okay, sharing those positive and negative experiences that we have in life and being there for each other, but doing it in a really purposeful way. Currently we do this through messaging apps and current social media models, and schools and workplaces can't use that data to understand and to measure and track well-being or impact, so it's a real big missed opportunity. So that's why we've decided we're going to reinvent that one. So because our vision is a world that any community organisation, any workplace, any school, any project can get their hands on that wellbeing information really quickly and really easily with that permission of those people that collect data. So I guess kind of where it started from and how it came about was my background as a data analyst. So I started off through studying neuroscience and forensic science at university, and then moved into police intelligence and I guess intelligence for SkyCity. So I was using data to analyse problems, first crime problems, and then with SkyCity I was looking at problem gambling, cheating, advantage play, money laundering, and I guess the normal crime that you get happening in and around casinos. We can understand and we can learn really powerful things when we can have and use and dig into really big data sets. I've got this really fun data story that I love telling, and it was something that I learned, a case study I learned when I was at police college, and it was kind of right in the early days of how police intelligence kind of started. There was this suburb in an area of London, and they the police station saw this huge spike in phone theft, cell phones. And the area commanders sort of got all this pressure from the bosses above saying, hey, these stats are making our police station look bad, let's put on an operation and bring our stats down. And so they put on this big operation, they poured heaps of resource into it, and they put on these foot patrols with police going to sort of hot spots, and they targeted the known cell phone receivers, you know, people they knew that were taking stolen cell phones and selling them on. And then after a few months, they looked at the stats again, and they hadn't made a dent at all. And they're like, what's going on? You know, this is what always works, and it hasn't worked this time. So they got a couple of university students in from a university, and they sort of plonked them down on this table with all these case files and said, okay, see if you guys can figure out what's going on. And so they went through all the case files and they broke it down by all the data components. So they looked at the times of the day and they realized, hey, we've got the spike of cell phone theft at 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. And then they looked at these locations like, well, quite a lot of them are happening around schools, and actually these are where the bus stops are. And then they looked at the demographics of the victims, like, oh, a few of them are 13 to 15-year-old teenage girls. Those scoundrels, you know, they're targeting our teenage girls and stealing phones off them. But then they looked at the offenders who had been caught, and a few of them were also 13 to 15 teenage girls. And then, you know, it kind of dawned on them that actually phones weren't being stolen to being sold and made money from it. That was a bullying tactic. So they completely changed and what they were doing with their operation. They did some anti-bullying programs within the local high schools, and then they saw their stats come down. And so when I learned about this case study, you know, just, you know, how many times are we addressing the same problems or these big problems that persist in our communities with something that either worked 10 or 20 years ago or something that's in a different location, and we wonder why it's not having the same impact. And it's because we're not really taking that time, or I think we are now, you know, sort of trying to gather that information, that data, to better understand that underlying cause. So that's why it makes me angry that we can't use social media data, because imagine if in your very suburb, you could take all the information that's been from Facebook in the last 10 years and say, you know, the last 10 years of young people that have gone through high school, what could we learn about where those vulnerabilities are, you know, like Suzanne was talking, like where are the vulnerabilities that are setting us up to not be so resilient for that next crisis or that next disaster. We could just learn so much. So that's our mission with the phone.
I just get mesmerized by all you incredible ladies, and forget I need to ask you a question. Your work has been going on for a while, Debs. I think we first met at Women Who Get Shit Done, right? A few years ago now, yeah. So your team has grown, and you're getting some traction now. What do you see happening in like the next 12-18 months? Because it's your work is sorely needed in the world, in Aotearoa right now. So what does it look like?
Yes, that's a big question. So this is what we're figuring out at the moment. How do we get momentum? Because it's a difficult business model. You know, it's a double-sided platform where we're trying to build that momentum of people using the app. We're mainly doing that locally at the moment. We've had the best uptake with young people. They just get social media. We don't really need to explain to them how to update their profile picture, so it's quite easy. But then also looking for those organisations who can use that data. So that's kind of where we're going at the moment. We have had a couple of really great campaigns at the moment. We worked very closely with one of our local high schools in the return from lockdown back to school, and we looked at how they were feeling coming out of lockdown. we had a hypothesis that anxiety would be quite high at the start, but we would see that come down. But actually over the 3-week period, we saw anxiety slowly went up. So it was really great able to sit with the principal, go through the results, and show those exact keywords and themes that were coming through of what students were feeling anxious about. The cool thing with Repost is it's not a survey. It looks and feels like social media. People are actually quite willing to be quite vulnerable on it, and that's definitely something we found with the young people, that they were posting about, you know, everything they were feeling, knowing their teachers would be looking at that information. But it was in a channel and a format that they're used to expressing themselves like that. So they were quite happy with that feedback system. The other thing is the psychology behind sharing on social media compared to filling out engagement surveys. More likely to express ourselves and share information when we're in the heat of the moment. You know, the emotion behind it tends to sort of prompt us to share that information. If you're asked how you were feeling a week or two later when you're filling out a survey, it's kind of gone. You know, the moment's gone. So Repost is built to be more of a real-time pulse on how people are feeling. And then that dashboard is a real-time dashboard of what are the positivity levels, what's your normal ups and downs for that group of people, what are the key emotions, what's that linked to. If you held an event one day, what was the impact of that? So working with young people, working with schools. The other thing that we're doing at the moment, which has had really cool uptake, is we're working with a mindfulness company down in Christchurch called Wonderful. So we're currently doing a 14-day workplace challenge. We've got 9 workplaces around the country at the moment going through the challenge, 68 participants. So every day they're listening to one mindfulness track. It's a couple of minutes, and they're posting their reflections on Repost. And so it's quite because collectively we're going through this mindfulness journey together with all these people that we don't really know, but we can see that they're posting and listening just by sharing this data dashboard. So I guess what we're kind of looking at the moment is how we build that momentum, how we find organisations who might be looking for a different or an additional engagement tool, and then partnering with them to sort of run through.
And so coming back to the example of the school, and with that being said, you know, with anxiety increasing, what are some of the steps that the school can then take, or things that they can implement to make sure that they're, I suppose, managing that?
Yeah, so I guess it's being able to provide that support that's very relevant to what those words or what those themes are coming through at the time. So, you know, just thinking about at that time with those types of posts coming through, it was related to being cold, it was related to winter, it was related to catching up with schoolwork. So it just gives them this real in-depth understanding that with a small group of students or a small school, you might be able to have that those one-on-one relationships where you would get that feedback. But it would be really handy, I think, for anyone managing large groups of people who can always check in personally, just to have that ongoing feedback of how people are feeling.
Yeah, also maybe they'll crank up the heaters if everyone's feeling really cold. Hey, and another question from Kaye-Maree. She says, Debs, can we white label or share in other communities?
Yeah, so that question's been asked quite a lot, and so that's something that we're exploring, how we go about doing that, how that works with the database underlying and just the permission aspects. But yeah, anything's possible with tech, and I'm sure Kaye-Maree's got some amazing ideas of how you can build those things using the technology that she's all over. Yeah.
Awesome. And if anyone does have any questions, put them in the little chat box. But I suppose, unless everyone does, we can kind of wrap up from here. And I think what's been most amazing about tonight is that, you know, although these issues can be really complex, like we mentioned earlier, the solutions are actually really exciting, and it's epic to see that people are so focused and dedicated to dealing with these issues that we all face and we've all had touch points with. But above and all, I think it's quite exciting that, you know, the solutions are coming.
Indeed, Viv. and the little generative conversation has generated what we hoped, and our Pascal and my intention was that people would be able to see the links, and the founders themselves see the links between these various different pieces of tech. It really is going to take all of us working together with all of these different lenses on the problems in order to build the systems that we want our children to inherit when you know, we hand over control to them. And I love that it's women, that it's mothers that are digging deep on these really complex issues. And I'm looking forward to the future in the next few months. And thank you, all of you, Debs, Kaye-Maree, Greer, Suzanne, you're awesome. Your mahi is amazing. Please keep going. And of course, we at Venture Centre are always here to help. Anybody that's been on the call this evening, thank you so much for coming along and paying these lovely ladies the respect to hear their work, hear their mahi. And please do reach out, because the more support we can get for these ladies, the better. I'm going to let Viv close the event, but again, thank you very much for coming along this evening. And yeah, here's to tech for good, right?
Thanks, Joe. And just to wrap up, I suppose, before I pass on to Pascal to wrap up even more a little bit, just a massive thank you to obviously our sponsors. And I know that I asked where we could connect with Kaye-Maree, but if you wanted to connect with any of the other speakers, I'm sure they're all on LinkedIn. That's where everyone seems to be at the moment. But Pascal, did you have anything else to say just to wrap up?
Thank you, Viv. First of all, we recorded this, and our audience knew it was recorded, and the link will be available to review, and you will be receiving this. Also, I will be in contact with our wonderful speakers this evening if they have anything to add, or if they would want to have some communication with any of you, if they can have a message, I will do that. So expect to hear from us in the next couple of days with the link and some of these extra details. That's it from me. A very heartfelt thank you to you, Viv, for keeping us some time, keeping us going, and also asking some really good opening question. And a big thank you to Joe for convening these wonderful speakers. That's it from now. Thank you for joining in, and thank you for being here for Tech Week and the Tauranga flavor of it being the Groundswell part. There's a few more events this week happening, so head over the Tech Week website. But as far as Venture Centre, we are done for the Tech Week this year. Kia ora. Thank you very much.
Ka kite.